The categories are not necessarily distinct buckets. People who have studied them and still believe in the categories hold that a law may fit into more than one. Yes, so I absolutely agree with you. And
is it helpful? So the point is, what are they serving to describe then? If they're not categories, how are the categories helpful? What are they helping us accomplish?
Well, so he makes one more. He just made another comment, but he makes another comment. He says examples that fit more than one place only refute a very shallow, rigid understanding of the categories. Okay, so hang on just a sec. Let's. I appreciate Andrew's taking a stand for what he believes here. However, let's take this to the logical conclusion. What is the point of making these categories if the Bible does not make them? And my argument to that would be, or my suggestion to that would be, is that people who hold to these categories want to say these laws have been done away with, these laws have not. It's a way to say that these laws don't apply anymore. So when someone like Walter Keicher, who believes that the Torah is, that was a question that I asked Keicher when I interviewed him. I asked him, do you believe that the Torah can be broken up into civil, ceremonial, and moral? And he said, yes, I do. Now, when Walter Keicher is pushed hard on things like the Sabbath, the conversation becomes very interesting, because since he believes in built-in obsolescence, if you push him on whether or not the Sabbath is a moral law, he has to admit that it is. And so now all of a sudden those categories are no longer helpful for the people who are trying to argue that the ceremonial laws are done away with, because all of a sudden the Sabbath law is what? It's moral. It's moral and it's ceremonial and it's civil, right? The man got put to death for it, so it's clearly a civil infraction.
So that's a really good point. And so what it makes me ask is this, Caleb, maybe you can help me. Are there instances, and maybe the brother who's posting the comment that you're interacting might be able to answer this. What's the gain if the people who are advancing the use of these categories, like promoting the use of these categories, if their aim is not to say, or if these categories don't describe something like the Sabbath, what is their motivation? Like, is there an alternative explanation of other than what you're suggesting? It seems to me like now it has never been a main issue for me, because I've always just said, well, that's not in the Bible. But every time I've heard in my personal experience, and I've talked with somebody about this division, it's exactly tied to what you're saying. It's always tied to an agenda that wants to say, I don't have to do those, but I'm only obligated for these. I don't have to do any of those things. Whew. That's why. And then it's like, I don't need to keep the Sabbath. The food laws don't apply to me, et cetera, et cetera. I've never heard those separate from each other. So I'm just asking, are there other people who use that categorization for some other theological purpose, talking about God's character, for example?
Right.
I don't know. I'm asking, but in my experience, it fits exactly with what you're saying. And it's always been tied to a main thrust is what do I got to do, and what doesn't have anything to do with me. Yeah, and not just me personally, and Christians.
So I agree with you. I have personally, and perhaps our brother Andrew, and because Andrew, I believe, is since he's taking this position publicly, I think, in not just on for those who don't know Andrew has taken this position very publicly on what was the cultish, I think, is where Andrew has put his views forward on this. And honestly, I appreciate Andrew because he's coming from a reformed position and attempting to really work out how he sees these, and that's fine. I have no problem with that. With that said, and maybe Andrew can enlighten us on this, but I personally, like you, Rob, have never seen anyone use the argument of the moral, civil, and ceremonial laws being broken up unless they are trying to say that we don't have to keep them anymore. And the problem is, so the first time anyone ever brought this up to me was in relationship to the kosher laws. However, if I look at the kosher laws, I don't see how these are ceremonial. So is every single meal that a person ate under what many would call the Mosaic Law or the Old Covenant, was everything that they ate ceremonial? I mean, clearly it wasn't, right? So all of a sudden, it was a part of life. It was a part of everyday living. It was a part of being steered by God's law, and so I would say that this was a moral issue. The other reason it's a moral issue is because there's no punishment for it, right? There's no way to come back from it. It's just a breach between you and God. It's something that God doesn't want you to do, and yet you do it anyway. That's a moral transgression. It's not anything. It's not a ceremonial transgression. If you do something ceremonially wrong, what happens? You become ceremonially unclean. However, this is not what happens in aspects to the kosher laws, right? If you transgress a kosher law, there is no retribution for it. There's no punishment for it, except for a breach between you and the God that you serve. So that is not a ceremonial law. That is a moral law. Yet those who hold to these categories are saying, well, we don't have to keep the kosher laws anymore because they are ceremonial. Well, it's the same with the Sabbath. Clearly, the Sabbath is a civil law. The interesting thing is that those at Apologia Studios who run Cultish, I mean, you know, Jeff Durbin is a theonomist, right? So he believes that and I don't want to speak for, I certainly don't want to speak for Mr. Durbin, and I wouldn't do that. And so I can only say what I have understood of other theonomists and how I see theonomy myself, which is that the civil law, quote unquote, if we're going to use this category, God's law should govern all nations, right? And we see this in Micah 4, right? The Torah will go forth and all nations will essentially come to the law. So the point here is simply that if the Sabbath is a civil law, because it clearly is, right? Somebody's put to death for breaking it. So that's a civil aspect of the Sabbath. If that is the case, then you have kosher laws and you have the Sabbath laws, which, according to the categories, should still be kept by Christians today.
Thank you so much for watching this video. Tell us your thoughts on this subject by leaving a comment in the comment section. Make sure you like, share, subscribe, and enable those notifications. And we'll see you in the next video.